Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. A big welcome to all of you. My name is Laura and I am delighted that you are joining us for today's ESPC community webinar. Today I am joined by the wonderful Tracy van der Schyff, who is joining us all the way from South Africa. And today Tracy will talk to you guys about how you can become a Teams ninja. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is #ESPC23. Don't forget to check out our resource centre, which is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars and how-to videos. You can access and view the resource centre by visiting our website sharepointeurope.com and clicking the content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, How to Make Your First Contribution to P&P Reusable Controls with Joel Rodriguez, where he will talk about the basics of the P&P reusable controls and where he will provide a step-by-step walkthrough of a process to make your first contribution. This webinar takes place on Wednesday, September 6th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CEST. For more information on this webinar, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. ESPC is fast approaching. If you are looking for a vibrant Microsoft 365 and Azure conference jam-packed with groundbreaking insights, visionary keynotes, hands-on workshops and exciting networking opportunities, then it's time to secure your early bird tickets for ESPC. But why should you attend ESPC? You can receive valuable insights by attending a variety of session types across the biggest Microsoft 365 and Azure topics, catering from levels 100 to 400. Hear from Microsoft product team members, regional directors, MVPs, MCMs, and independent experts. ESPC is also a great way to build your professional network and meet like-minded people from across the globe. Share and receive advice from fellow attendees, but also from our very friendly and helpful speakers. ESPC also helps you to keep up and get ahead with product developments and practices that matter the most. Find new and better ways of working and bring new energy and effectiveness to your work. Expect the latest news straight from Ignite. Invest in your team, invest in yourself, and invest in your career by learning new skills or mastering current ones at ESPC. Book before September 29th to avail of our early bird pricing and our special team discounts. And besides all the techie stuff, don't miss out on a chance to take a break from the tribes and tribulations of your work to experience an energetic city where centuries-old architecture meets cutting-edge innovation. Explore the historic canals, visit trendy bars, and enjoy the city's cool vibe, and maybe even check out some Christmas markets. So again, you can visit sharepointeurope.com to secure your tickets at this discounted price. Last June, over 1,200 Power Platform professionals gathered in Dublin for the European Power Platform Conference 2023. Check out our amazing showreel video full of conference highlights from Dublin. Next year, we're taking the European Power Platform Conference to Brussels. Join over 1,500 of your professional peers and expect world-class expert guidance to help you succeed in your projects and career. And of course, not to forget an unforgettable experience in the beautiful city of Brussels. You can register your interest for the European Power Platform Conference in Brussels at sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. So after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will also be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Tracy. Hello, Tracy.
Hello, everyone, and what a wonderful introduction there, Laura, and hi to everyone. I've got so many screens open in front of me, so I can see that I'm there on this side, so I'm not really watching any of the chats or the questions. I just want to share my screen quick. I definitely don't work with go to webinar every day. So let's just quickly see. I want to make sure if you can just give me a heads up, Laura, that you can see the correct screen. And then I think I can take it away.
Yeah, that looks good, Tracy.
Wonderful. So I think firstly, I don't even know who's in the audience. I'm pretty sure this industry is small, right? We've seen each other all across the world, and especially if you've ever gone to ESBC, which is one of my favorite conferences, I might have seen you there. So a very, very big welcome to today's webinar. It's such an honor for me to be here, and I'm always very flattered when the group asks me to join them and to share some of my crazy ideas. Then also, I just would like to check in, Laura, we do have, I'm just checking our time. At what time would you like me to stop for the Q&A? I just want to plan myself ahead for timing.
We can leave maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the end for Q&A.
We'll do so. Okay, and you can just give me a heads up. So let's get started. The reasoning behind this presentation of mine today is that I'm working with so many companies that are really struggling to sort out their teams. So, of course, Teams was launched in 2016, and we all grabbed it and ran with it. And, of course, we ended up with over-adoption, as I lovingly call it, because everyone just started creating teams without really understanding the consequences. In my work, in my career, in my business, I think I focus most on actually helping companies sort out the mess, and not so much as into doing it right, but to fix what they've done so far. So I really do hope that with sharing some best practices with you, and also, let me remind you, I don't know everything, but I know everyone who does, okay? And I don't know all the right answers, but I'm definitely going to share with you what you shouldn't do, because I've made all the wrong decisions, right? And that's how we learn. So I do think that it's a lie when we say that we can't learn from others' mistakes, because we can. And that's the purpose of these webinars, of course, is to share these lessons learned with each other so that we can actually do it right. So a big focus for me for today is to look at Teams, at what we shouldn't be doing. What are those pitfalls? What can we do to do it right? How can we plan this right and get it right from the start? And even if you do have Microsoft Teams in your company already, there is no place better to turn around and make the right decision than right now. So don't be afraid if it's already been in the company a long time and a lot of stuff's been done. It's always a good time to turn around and say, hey, let's do this different, or let's try and fix this. And I do hope that today's webinar can share loads of you, of those lessons learned with you, of course. I do have some slides, and then, of course, I am going to go into a demonstration mode as well. So let's take a look. Just for those who doesn't know me, I do have had a nice introduction there. Thank you very much. All the way, beautiful, beautiful sunny day in South Africa today. We're always very lucky with the weather, of course. You can find me on Twitter, Tracy VDS, and then you can also find me on my website, tracyvanderschyff.com. Now, the first thing that I'd like to talk about is actually about your digital strategy. Now, it's easy to say that we've got Teams, we've launched it, everyone's got all the apps and services in the company, but do they really know what they're supposed to do with it? Are we just unleashing all these superpowers, and do they really understand what they're supposed to be doing with the technology? So when it comes from a digital strategy, I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. We definitely try and write that 40-page document, right? That documents your whole intent and what are you going to do in your company. And that's definitely not necessary. I do believe that less is sometimes more, okay? So don't overcomplicate this. Don't try and document anything you can ever think of, because this is going to keep on changing. Your digital strategy will change every day. You have to review this at least monthly, and you have to keep on making changes to it. So if you put a digital strategy down, you have to make sure that the people understand that it's a living, breathing protocol. This is not laid down in cement or concrete or in stone, but can be changed and should be changed as technology changes and as the maturity of the company changes. So let's take a look at a very simple digital strategy. If I just focus on the content that we work with, so I'm not going to focus on communication methods, etc. I'm going to just focus on storage for a moment. If I look at my companies, I normally say that we can divide it in 3 areas. There's the me area, there's the we area, and there's the us area. Okay, so what does that mean? Where do I work? Where do I work together with a team? Where do I as a company fit in, if that makes sense? And you can definitely, and I'll see if there's time in the Q&A, if I can find the link and share it with you as well. But the mocha that Microsoft has is incredible at demonstrating that. So I'll definitely share that resource as well. So if I look at this environment, The me environment for me, of course, is OneDrive. Now, of course, I'm talking about Outlook as well. That's also your area. But just for storage, OneDrive for Business is definitely your place to be. So the purpose of OneDrive for Business, of course, is to protect everything that's on your PC. It also allows you to share files externally. And then, of course, it also allows you to share files ad hoc with people through Teams. So OneDrive is your me environment. The next environment that I want to look at is your we environment. And that's where teams and groups of people work together. So if I look at my departments, this could be a department, this could be a project that works together, it could be a forum, it could be an initiative, maybe it's a monthly type of reporting session, etc. And these are your we environments. So as soon as you have a group of people that has to work together, that shares content together, there's permissions that apply, there's rules of engagement, then people that would be a Microsoft team. And then, of course, and there can be much more, there's the us environment. And if I think of the us environment, without going into too much detail, this, of course, is when I think of things like company intranets and communication portals and things that are publicly made available for people to access, to find resources, to find documents. It's normally an environment where there's a small group of contributors and a much larger audience that consumes the content. So that's normally your intranet type of environment. There's a lot more applications we can slot in there, of course, but for now, I'm just focusing mostly on where we actually store our information. So my me environment, think OneDrive for Business. My we environment, think Microsoft Teams, even the OneNote in Teams, even the Planner in Teams, even the Microsoft lists and everything that's connected to it. And then the us environment would be things like your intranet. Now, this is a very, very simple or simplistic way of looking at what is the purpose of these apps in the company. But it does help to do it with an infographic, for example, and to try and do it on a page or two. And then start communicating this in your company. Make sure that everyone understands what those different areas are, because then they will understand the purpose of apps better. And they'll also start understanding permissions and sharing a lot better. So get this straight first before you try and get people to use Teams more efficiently, if that makes sense. So this is my me, my we, and my us environment, and it's a very simplistic way to actually look at a digital strategy. Next up, I would actually like to talk about information architecture. Now that's a very, very big, and I call it fancy pants, right? It's a very fancy word for a structure, okay? And for those who doesn't really dwell in these areas, information architecture is the way that we store our content. These could be folders, folders inside of folders, folders and folders inside of folders, of course, but it's the way that we categorize our content and also structure our content. So the information architecture about all of these things are very important to me. It's crucial that our end users and our employees, of course, understand what it is that happens in the background. I don't agree with only sharing enough information with them to keep them out of trouble. And I think as IT, we used to do that for many years, okay? We just share enough information with our employees to keep them out of trouble. And we need to change that. The technology that we work with today is autonomous technology. It no longer is a question of a user just consuming the technology. They now have to start owning it and being responsible and efficient users of the technology. So sharing enough information with those people actually helps us to get environments where the maturity and the IT maturity is higher and people respect the technology that they work with and they work more efficiently. So let's take a look at the information architecture and what I mean by that. When I work in companies, something that people so often ask me is, Trace, I actually don't understand. Why is it that when I go to OneDrive for Business, why do I suddenly see my SharePoint sites there? I mean, there's my OneDrive for Business. So there's my stuff, right? It's my me environment. And then suddenly there's the us environment. There's my SharePoint intranet and some of the communication portals. And then lo and behold, there's also my Microsoft Teams. So this is incredibly, incredibly difficult for end users to understand. Why do I go to my OneDrive and suddenly see everything? So this also makes for a lot of confusion to happen because people start storing things in the wrong places because they actually don't understand the containers. So again, going back to the me, we, and us environment, I think it's important to explain to users why is it that they see everything there. Very few users and employees, let's call them rather employees that I've ever spoken to, actually understand why they can see everything there. If I look at this environment, and again, of course, I'm in office.com and I've just navigated to OneDrive for Business. So there I can see my files. This is my me environment. There I can see the intranets, and here I can see the we environments, which is my Teams. The reason why I can see everything here is because there's something in the background that's similar. And I'd like to share that next with you. Now, before I get all techy about this and start talking about big platforms that we store things on, I'm going to talk about Tupperware, believe it or not. Tupperware, I don't even know if everyone on this call knows what Tupperware is, okay? But Tupperware obviously was a very big thing in the 70s, and I don't even know if it was in the 60s. I'm not even sure when Tupperware started up. But Tupperware is exactly what I want to be talking about right now. If I think of Tupperware, and I think of a Tupperware bowl, okay, so a plastic container. So I have a plastic container with a beautiful green teal lid. I've got a plastic container with a purple lid. I've got a lovely plastic container with a blue lid. Hey, Trace, where are we going with this? Okay, must be crazy. You're thinking, what webinar am I sitting on? Tupperware, honestly? So if I look at those different Tupperware containers, if I look at the lid of my Tupperware, that's my UI, it's my user interface, okay? That's the first thing I see of my container. If I think of the bowl of my Tupperware, that's my storage. So all of these things are very similar. They all have storage and they have different lids. So if I think of this analogy, what am I actually referring to? So I'm sure some of you are starting to play those guessing games already. The Tupperware with the teal lid, of course, is SharePoint. The Tupperware with the blue lid is my OneDrive. And the Tupperware with the purple lid is my Microsoft Teams. So what am I trying to say to you? Is that behind all of those things is SharePoint, okay? It's just sitting there in the background. It's serving its purpose by being the most amazing storage platform ever. But Microsoft has gone and given us different Tupperware lids. And with those different Tupperware lids, we are able to actually look at the content from different angles. And we are given tools with those lids that works with that content differently. If I work on my OneDrive, the UI that I have is different because the way that I work with the content is different. If I work in Teams, my UI is different. My purple lid is different than OneDrive because I have different tools, I have ways to communicate, but at the end of the day, my storage is still SharePoint. And if I work with standalone SharePoint, and what I mean by that is sites that are built that are not linked to Microsoft Teams, then of course, my UI looks different again. It's much more web-based. All of these, of course, I can navigate to office.com and actually see it in the web. And you'll see that when you start realizing that everything's the same in the background, you'll understand why the features are the same. Why is it that there's 500 versions that's the same? Why does the versioning work the same? Why does the recycle bin work the same? Because it is the same. So think of it next time. If you're struggling to explain this to your employees, because it is difficult, you might be sitting on this webinar going, oh, Trace, that is so silly. Everyone knows this. I can promise you that everyone doesn't know this. The biggest mistake we make in IT is to assume that people know, because they don't. And because they don't know, they're making trouble in companies and they're messing up the environment that they work in. If I had $1 or a euro or a rand for every time someone said to me, Teams is messy, I would be so rich, but I'd still sit on this webinar because I love doing this, right? But I would be so rich. And it's purely because people are using it wrong. It's not the technology's fault. We need to put more effort into explaining to people how things work and why they work that way. So think of that analogy. Everything in the background has a storage environment, and that's our SharePoint. And the front end looks different because of how we angle and access the content and how we want to work with it. So it's a pretty clever thing that Microsoft did there. Now let's take a look next at should everything be Teams? Because I think that's what causes a lot of this drama, is that Teams are being created unnecessarily. Okay, it definitely is. Now, we'll still share a couple of best tips and tricks here. Okay, I do have my own opinions, and I want to share this about this webinar as well. There's many different ways of doing things. You have to remember this. There's many different ways of doing things, okay? I have an opinion about how things should work. Why I want it to work that way is because of experience, because of I've experienced with companies, but you can't always copy and paste this, this methodology anyway. You have to make it your own. So whatever I'm sharing with you, go back, think about it, see if it's something that you can apply, but we all have our opinions and we all can work with the technology differently. But I definitely have some opinions about the creation of Teams, so we'll chat about that next. If I think of a decision tree, now we'd love to build that little workflow that says, is this what you want to do? Then do that. Is this what you want to do? Then do that. Here is a very simple slide as well to help you understand what I think of when Teams should be used and when not. If you simply want to chat with someone, think Skype for Business that's been replaced, right? You definitely don't need a team. We know this. You can simply use the chat inside of Teams, but you don't need a created Microsoft team to be able to chat. If you want to have a group chat with 2 or 3 people, definitely don't need a team. You can even rename it, and I'll show you. So I don't need a team to just have a group chat. To chat with 3 or 4 people on a regular basis, definitely don't need a Microsoft team. Do you just want to do an audio call or maybe a video call? Nope, you don't need a team. Team does not have to be created. Now, I know it can be confusing because when I say team, the application we use it in is Teams, and then there's a part of Teams that's called Teams, which is where you have structured teams that are built. So that might be confusing to your employees as well. If you want to have a folder with files in, or you want to be able to share a folder with files in, do you need a team? Nope, because you have OneDrive for Business. Do you have an informal community that gets together once a month and discusses, I don't know, the sports that you partake in, or maybe the hobbies that you have? Don't necessarily need a team for it. You can have one, but you don't need a team. You can use Yammer, of course you can. You can have a SharePoint site. You can have a group chat. You don't necessarily need a team. Now, as soon as you have structured things, so I normally ask the following question. Is it a group of people that regularly work together? Do they share tools with each other? Do they need a storage space? Are they going to communicate with each other and sometimes have meetings? Do we have to apply permissions? So is it an audience that's closed? Well, then you definitely need a Microsoft team. And I even go as far as to say that even if it's just 2 people, if there's enough going on in that process, people, I'll use a team. But if not, I'll use a chat. I mean, you can use a chat, you can use a group chat, definitely a good idea. So forums and projects, definitely a great idea to have Microsoft Teams for that. Then also cross-functional working. So let's say I'm in HR and you're in finance. We might have a team where there's a bit of a cross-function between finance and HR, where we actually work together and we collaborate. Of course, I can share a file with them or a folder with them, but perhaps we actually collaborate and we want to work in a team together. And then definitely, if I start helping companies structure their teams, the first thing I ask them is for org structures. If the company is small enough that I'm not going to build teams for a company of 100,000 users, they'll have to do that themselves. But if I look at their org structure, I can immediately see what their departments are. Because if I look at departments and sub-departments and business units, that normally indicates the type of teams that should be created. Because teams are created on the level of where there's ownership. So if I have a group of people and there's ownership there, there's a manager or a team lead, that normally indicates to me that there should be a team. So these are the type of questions that I normally ask before people just create teams. And this does bring me to some of the settings that I want to make suggestions about. But normally, wouldn't create teams for all those other things. I know that it's easy to create teams, and I think that's the most difficult part of this. They should actually make us do, I don't know, 500 sit-ups before you're allowed to create a team, you know, because maybe we'll be healthier and there'll be less teams, maybe. But it's too easy to create teams, and I think that's causing a lot of problems. And it sounds crazy to say that Microsoft's made something too easy, but I do think that that might be a challenge. If I look at the team, so now that we have a team, and now that we agree that, hey, we don't always need a team, right? Now that we have the teams, let's take a look at what I think that includes. Some of these things on here, of course, like Skype for Business and Kaizala is just there for indication. But what is it that a Microsoft team actually gives me? So it gives me a space to work together with a group of people. It virtually replaces a physical office, if you think of it that way. So we used to have an office, a physical office that we sit in. There's a whiteboard against the wall. I have a planner stuck up there somewhere. Someone's got a calendar that we flip every month with beautiful photos of the world on it. We have a boardroom table. We've got a big filing cabinet that we store things in. There is a conference type telephone on the table as well. We all have PCs and ways to access things. That's exactly what a team is, but it's just virtual. So if I look at a team, what does it give me? When a team is created, creates a SharePoint site collection in the background. So it gives me access to a storage, to its own storage. I also have a OneDrive for Business connection. So in Teams, I can access the files that I work with. There's also a level of integration with Outlook, which we can chat about. I can also integrate Yammer into there for informal communities or social communities. Of course, we know the communications in Teams is rebuilt based on what Skype for Business was. And then just to mention, but not that I actually use it in the companies where I'm at, there was Kaizala as well. So we'll see where Kaizala goes. And there is some level of integration with it for the companies that are still using it. Inside of Teams as well, because it's a Microsoft product, of course, it works beautifully with Microsoft Office, with the apps, the business apps for enterprise. Okay, so Excel, PowerPoint, Word. So the integration and the access and the co-authoring on it is brilliant. It also gives you the ability to add other tools to your Teams by using the website connectors. You can also use the Who bot to connect to your people and find out who they are. I can also integrate forms for surveys, Stream for videos, Sways for information packs. Of course, we can add Microsoft lists as well. We can use OneNote and Planner. And then, of course, the most powerful is the Power Platform. So as soon as you start using this very efficiently, we can actually integrate the Power Platform to then do even more. So it's this incredible ecosystem that brings all of these tools together. Of course, it's amazing. But when you end up with 500 of these people, then it gets confusing. People store things in the wrong places. People use the wrong areas because teams are duplicated or not clear. Maybe their purpose isn't clear. Remember this again, that less is more. I'd rather have less teams and be very, very clear about the content that I'm sharing than have too many teams. So this is my ecosystem. This is the environment that a team gives us the ability to have access to and to replace. I think, of course, Microsoft was way ahead of the years when lockdown happened and a lot of us had to work remotely and a lot of companies changed the way they worked. Teams actually allowed for us to create those workspaces and people could continue in those workspaces. And for that, I was incredibly thankful. Next up, I want to talk about your structure of your teams. So all of these are best practices that I'm sharing. I want to talk about the structure, when I think it should be one team, when it should be two teams, what I think about your channels. And again, I'm reminding you that I'm only sharing with you my experiences. You cannot apply these levels of thinking to everything in the world. I cannot understand how every business works, and I cannot understand how every department works. But these are definitely best practices that I'm using in companies, and I do hope that you can use them as well. If I look at the structure of your teams, when I start planning teams, because that's saying plan to fail and fail to plan. It's very important. If you don't sit around a table with a group of people or even on a Teams call, open up Excel, start making a list of the content that you work with. If you don't plan your Teams people, you will end up with chaos. It's really difficult. If you don't put the effort into plan your teams, you will end up with chaos. Just because you can create 200 channels doesn't mean you should create 200 channels, okay? That's chaos. I normally sit down with departments and I ask them what content they work with. What is the content you work with every day? What is the processes you work with? If this was finance, perhaps my processes would be accounts receivable, accounts payable, budgets, etc. Human resources would work differently. So I look at the processes and the areas that they work in, and I then take those areas and I help them analyze what we can group together. Because I believe in the magic rule of 7 plus or minus 2. If you've never heard of that, you better go check it out. So that says that most people can remember pockets of information of around about 7, less 2 or plus 2. So some of us can remember up to 9, some of us from 5. So your brain deals with pockets of information better. And believe it or not, that's exactly why telephone numbers were designed the way they were. The numbers of digits was designed around that way of thinking. So I normally in Teams advise my clients to try and stick to 7 channels. It's just the easiest way. If you don't put a goal down there, you'll never be able to achieve something or be able to measure your success, right? So I'm saying, guys, let's try and stick to 7 channels. I think that's a good grouping. And then we do another subgrouping. So for example, if I look at this example, I've got benefits. And in my benefits channel, I can then have medical aid, pension, maybe pamphlets that we share with our employees, etc. I don't mind going 2 to 3 levels deep. So my channel would be my first folder and then go another 1 or 2 levels deep. Of course, I need you to remember this. The deeper those folder structures go, the worse the experience is. And we do have things like character limits. So it definitely impacts your search and the performance in your teams. Try and get that down to go about 3 levels deep with your folders. Use better naming conventions because that will definitely help you flatten those structures as well. So I normally try and stick to 7 channels and I try to go no deeper than 3. But of course, like I said, this cannot be applied to everything. Now, if I look at that team, For example, I'm doing this exercise now with human resources, and they're saying to me, Trey, so we've got new offers as well, where we actually put the document in which we make the offer to the new employee. So that will state their salary, who they'll report to, etc. And then also we do reconciliations on the salaries every month. Now, most people would just put it in their team and then take one or more different routes to actually share that out, because now those highlighted areas can't be open to everyone in the team. Now, of course, we know that Microsoft has brought out features that helps you fix that, which I don't necessarily agree with. You can create a private channel in a team, which then gives access only to a subset of the people of the team. You can also create a shared channel in a team that gives access to pretty much anyone, even excluding the team, okay? I do not believe in using private and shared channels often. I definitely see them as exceptions and not as the rule. So in this instance, before even people start changing permissions, because of course, I can store the stuff in there. I can have this open to everyone in human resources, and then I can go change the permissions on a folder. But just because I can doesn't mean I should. I normally suggest to people to stick to the permissions of their teams. If this is open to the whole team, the business rule is that everyone in the team can access everything in the team. I personally, when possible, suggest to rather split content off and create a separate team. Yes, I know it creates another SharePoint site collection, but our brains deals with a separate team different than a subfolder somewhere that has different permissions applied to it. When it comes to private and shared channels, and when it comes to changing the permissions on folders, it very often happens that people store content in the wrong place, forgetting that the business rules are different or that the permissions are different. I would rather have a separate team for human resources sensitive content, if that makes sense. So don't focus on the audience, focus on the content that's being stored, and then put it in a place that is similar for that audience, because you'll end up seeing that there's a lot of content that might be belonging to that specific audience. I definitely would consider rather separating teams. I'm not a big fan of private and of shared channels, and I'm definitely not a big fan of changing permissions on folders and teams. Definitely not. So look at your structure of your teams. I think a bit of planning needs to go into these. And of course, things change as we go on. So I totally understand when we can't always apply those rules to everything. Also, just some best practices around a checklist for teams. So when a new team is created, of course, the owner will create this team. Try and stick to naming conventions if it's possible in your company to look at naming conventions. We definitely, as far as we can, set up guidelines for naming conventions. Definitely go and add the OneNote to Teams, add the planner as well to the team, then change the settings for the members, which we're going to chat about now. It might upset a couple of people. Then also add any other owners or members. I always have 2 owners on a team. Then also, if you get added to a team, please check first who the members and owners are before you start working in that team. Before you start sharing content or communicating or collaborating, just check the owners first, because there might be a misunderstanding about the audience, or someone could have added the wrong person to that team. Then also, if you want to navigate to SharePoint and set up an alert, that's definitely something else that I consider as good practice to do. So maybe alerts on specific channels or even alerts on deleted items is definitely a good idea. Then also, while you're in SharePoint, how about syncing that library down to your PC? And remember to do it on the all documents level. Many users are syncing Teams down on the wrong level because they go through a channel, and many users are picking up issues with adding shortcuts to OneDrive. So that's definitely something you have to communicate better in the company as well, and make sure that people are getting training around it. So there should be some awareness and comms. Then also, what you want to do with the input from your team is sit and actually workshop what your channel should be, workshop what your tabs should be in the start. And then, of course, do you want to add the specific channel calendars, and do you want to use different OneNote sections, etc. So that's just a couple of pointers for people when they actually start looking at setting up their Microsoft Teams. I just want to check quickly, and I want to make sure, I just want to check the timing on when my team changes. So just give me one moment. And I want to bring a screen across, and I want to make sure that, there we go. Nice. I wanted to check the screen that's showing. If I look at my checklist for teams, now, of course, when we start creating the team, and I'm going to do all of those steps with you now, there's a lot of things to consider. And now I'm probably making this sound much more overcomplicated than it is, because, hey, it's so easy to create a team, right? But like I said, I think we're creating a lot of drama for ourselves. So if I look at these teams, there's definitely a couple of things that I do to make it better. So let's go through some of these. When I look at a team right at the bottom, and I just want to zoom out slightly. So let's quickly see. I just want to zoom out. I had this issue the other day as well that my settings wasn't showing. So let me just quickly open up my own team. So just give me a moment. Okay. When I'm in Teams, if I say join or create a team, of course, I can create a team. I can also join a team with a code. So that's when we set up teams or supply codes to teams. Where do I get that code, by the way? If I create a team for a very large audience to join, let's say, for example, I have a big workshop and there's a lot of people that needs to join, then I can go to the settings of the team and I can get the team code there. I can actually generate a team code there that actually then helps people to very quickly join that team. If I look at my teams as well, so let's go and create a team. When I create a team, I have a couple of options. I can start from scratch, or I can start from a group or a team, okay? This from a group or a team means that I can copy an existing team's layout, or I can link it to a SharePoint site with a team group, an Office 365 group that was created previously that doesn't have a team connected to it. So if you created SharePoint team sites before and you now want to link a team to the front end, then you can do that. And then, of course, there's a couple of templates you can pick from as well. So if I go from scratch, there's three options I have. I can create a private team where I have a group of members I add. I can add a public team that people can visibly see in the organization and then actually request to join. And I can also create org-wide teams. And that is where everyone in the company is automatically added. I haven't checked that recently, but org-wide teams normally allows for 5,000 people, perhaps 10,000. Can't remember now, might be 10, but it allows for a certain set of users, and you can also only have a limited number of org-wide teams in the company. So let's take a look at creating a private team. So for today, I'm going to create the Digital Strategy Forum. Okay, this is where I can put a description in. So used to review and update the digital strategy. And of course, I can create this. And let's give it a moment. Oh, that's nice that it's taking a bit longer for a change. It's better if it's taking longer. Nice work. So once I've created it, I can add members to it. So I'm going to add Bram to my team as well. And then, of course, as soon as I've added him, I can actually change people from members to owners. And then I'm going to close it. That's how quick it is to create a Microsoft team. But now I want you to remember that there's a SharePoint site collection created in the background. That's the challenge that we have. There's a SharePoint site collection created in the background, okay, for every team you create. So that was very, very quickly. So sometimes people are creating teams just to share a folder with a file in it. A whole SharePoint site collection, that's just crazy. Cray, if you ask me. So let's take a look at this SharePoint site collection. If I go to File, so at the moment, and I just want to take this right to the top. If I go to my files and I go to open in SharePoint, let's open up the SharePoint site behind us. So there you can see files open up in SharePoint. Here you will see that there's a SharePoint site linked to this team. So Digital Strategy Forum, Digital Strategy Forum. And at the moment, I'm in the general folder because I was standing on the general channel. So if I go back to my team and me and my team has workshopped this, so let's say I need to have a channel for meetings, and that might sound strange, but I normally do my meetings in a separate channel. I'm going to add that, but I want to show you that as soon as I add a channel in a team, it automatically creates a folder in the SharePoint library. So your team channels are directly linked to folders in your SharePoint library, and that's why the planning of that's very important for me. Definitely wouldn't create folders on the SharePoint side. I always advise my people to create the channels from this side. So now that I've created this SharePoint site behind the team, because that's automatically created, and I navigate to it, it will navigate to the folder of the channel that I was standing on. If I go back to the documents level, or you can just click on documents on the left, I can then sync this team down. So if I sync this team down, I can then visibly see it on my PC, which is nice. And I normally sync it down on the documents level. I will only sync it down on a channel level if that's the only channel that I really work with. Something else that I suggest that you do here is to also look at the alerts. Depending on the level that you're standing on in the library, if I go to alerts, I can set up an alert to say, notify me if items are deleted, or notify me if someone changes something that I created. Now that might sound silly because your Teams has a SharePoint site with a recycle bin that keeps documents for 93 days that are deleted, or items. But of course, Murphy's Law says 94 days, right? And then someone's going to remember that something's missing. In the beginning, if you start using Teams, people tend to be a little bit trigger happy, and they very easily delete things, especially when they sync libraries down to their PCs. People get confused with libraries that are synced down and very easily delete things to no longer see it on their PCs. So I would, as a team owner, I would set up an alert on deleted items for every Friday. So I would say when items are deleted, and I would also change this. I'm going to say this is my digital strategy forum deleted items. And then I'm going to say when items are deleted, send me a weekly summary, send it to me on a Friday afternoon at, let's say, 3 p.m. So it'll send you a little audit log that says these folders and files were deleted. Of course, in very big teams, that would be crazy, but remember that you can even set it up on a folder or a subfolder level. So I can, if I had a folder in my meetings, so if I, for example, I'm really just making this up as I go, so let's just call this templates. If I had a folder in here and that's the only one I want to monitor, then I can actually select that folder and I can set up an alert on that level. So you can set up an alert on a folder or subfolder or channel or the whole library level. Teach your people to set up alerts and not wait until something goes wrong. Teach them to trust the technology. The technology will let them know if something goes wrong, and to learn to trust the people. Do you know how often people tell me that they need to change the permissions on Teams because they don't trust the people that they work with? I can't be in a team together with Laura because we know that she always comes into work early and I'm scared she's going to edit my files or delete my files. Please don't change the permissions. People often say to me, no, Trace, everyone must only have read access to this folder. I say just set up an alert. You've got 500 electronic versions and you've got a recycle bin of 93 days. So if you want to make sure that people don't make changes to things, set up an alert. Why would you go change the permissions? That's just crazy. So I would not change the permissions. I only change permissions or put things in separate teams if it's a risk for them to see the content, not if it's a relevant thing. We need to learn to start trusting people. The autonomous technology that we work in no longer allows for us to be mistrusting of everyone. The technology is there to warn you about things, people, so don't be afraid of things that can go wrong. Only remove things if it's a high risk for someone to see it. If someone can get fired when they see something that shouldn't be there, okay? And don't go change the permissions on something on that level because that definitely isn't secure enough. So that's your alerts that you can set up. And that definitely allows you to monitor specific things. And that's also where you can sync your PC down. If I go back to the team, very, very important for me. And let me just open up Teams. This is really important for me. If you go to the team and you go to the settings on the team, manage team, settings. I'm very sorry to say this, and I love people very much and trust them and want the best for them in the world, but I do not allow my members to create channels and tabs. And it's not because I don't think they can't do it well. It's because I don't think that if everyone can do something, we'll ever have any less chaos than we currently have. I believe that the owners on team should add channels and tabs, and that we collectively as a team should make those decisions together. So this is something that each team can actually instill and say that this is the way that they want to work. So that's definitely something that I do. If I also look, and I just want to go back to my slides, if I also look at my slides, so let's just get that up again. There we go. So definitely take a look at the member settings. I think that's good practice, is to where decided and it works for you is good. I'm already busy with my demo, so we can skip that. I would also consider removing the ability to create private channels and share channels. I know that sounds terrible, but people are creating some very scary horror stories where I open a team and there is 20 private channels, which means that there's 21 SharePoint site collections behind that team. That's crazy. I also advise companies to fund the creation of teams. Yep, I can only imagine how many people would be mad at me for that. I'd rather teach team owner as well and put them into an AD, allow them to create teams. So as soon as you've gone through decent training and you're mature enough in your way of thinking, I definitely want them to make the right decisions. So of course, please consider that as well. And then I think very, very importantly for me is make sure that the training is done well in the company. Make sure that the people have the tools that they need to do the right things. So for me, I'd rather lock down the creation of the teams. I would rather create an Azure security group that those people belong to, and then we can actually allow specific people to add and create teams. So of course, once people have had the training, they can then be placed in that security group and they'll be able to create teams. But then they might be making the right decisions for creating those teams, and that's a much better way to be. I don't want them so many teams. I don't want them to dislike teams. I love using Microsoft Teams, and when used correctly and designed and planned correctly, it really, really works well. So definitely consider that, is to take a look at how we can kind of like limit the chaos that happens. And it's purely because people just don't know. It's not their fault. There's no way someone can create a team and structure it perfectly if no one has ever trained them well. That's like saying everyone's had bicycles for years and now we're just issuing cars with a license attached to it without ever putting them through any decent training. Please be fair towards your users. I don't lock down the creation of teams to punish them. I lock it down to make sure that they have a better experience in teams. And then once they start having a better experience and they start using it more efficiently and responsibly, then they can create teams. I don't mind at all. Please remember that it's not usage that we're after. We used to look at usage as the big thing. We want so many people to use Teams. No, we don't. It's no longer adoption that we're after, to be quite honest, because adoption just says that people are using the Teams and maybe they're creating and they have over adoption. What we're actually after is people being digital citizens. So we want them to be digital citizens, which is responsible and efficient users of technology. And that's something that's very important for me. We have to pass enough knowledge on to our employees for them to make better decisions. I suppose it's pretty much like being a parent. You can't trust your child and you can't judge your child for not making the right decisions if you don't pass the knowledge on for them to be able to make the right decisions. Please let's do that with our employees as well. Give them enough knowledge to make better informed decisions so that they have a better working environment inside of Microsoft Teams, inside of SharePoint. It's a wonderful product to use when people are using it correctly. I am going to go a couple of minutes more on some tips and tricks that I'd like to share with you, and then we can start running into the Q&A. I just want to see, I'm definitely not looking at any Q&A running, so I'm not looking at any chats, so we'll get to that in a moment. So please remember to look at the settings that you can apply in the portal and making sure that if you haven't rolled out the training, then rather lock down the creation of these to better understand what actually happens in the background. I do want to remind you, so let's just go to the tips and tricks, and I do want to open up my my Teams again. So let me just get my browser. I was talking about the private and the shared channels, and I was making a mistake by assuming that everyone in the school fully understands what that means. I want to just defend for a moment why I have reservations about creating private channels and why I do it as an exception and not as a rule. If I look at this team, if we now have some reports that should be closed to certain people, I can go on this team. I can say, or maybe I should make Brahma owner on this team. Or let me quickly do this. Members, let me just do this and make Brahma owner. There we go. So if I look at this team, I can then go and say add channel, and I'm going to say this is reporting, and then I'm going to say, oh, well, I don't want everyone to access this. I'm going to change this to a private channel, which means that only specific people can have access. Now that's not going to make sense. I'll have to add more members to this team. So just give me a moment. Let's add someone else to this team as well. Okay, so reporting, I can then create that private channel. And now this means that if I have 10 or 20 people in this team, I can then, on a private channel, selectively choose some of those people. So a subset of the members and owners. I can now say that on this channel, only Tracy should belong to it. Okay, not the rest of the people. So only myself and Tracy belongs to it. I'm going to add this. This is now Brahm talking. Okay, that must be crazy. So I've now added that private channel, and you'll see that private channel now has a little lock next to it. So now remember, I said that the Digital Strategy Forum has a SharePoint site behind it. There we go. beautiful, big SharePoint website. Let's go back. Let's go to reporting. I'm going to go to files. I'm going to go to SharePoint. Let's look at that for a moment. That, people, is 2 different SharePoint site collections. So you've just created a whole SharePoint site collection, perhaps just for one folder or one document. So what I would rather do, if that's something that really makes sense to do, I would rather share it through chat or in a chat directly, or have it in a different team. There's some instances where channels really works well for me. So let's think of having a team. We're running a very big contract. I've got about 20 external contractors on the team as well, and about 20 from the company. And now I want to channel that team where the contractors can't see it, only the people from my company. Then a private channel makes sense. So then I would consider a private channel because all the content will go in there. But don't create private channels just for a file or just for a folder that you're sharing. Please be very careful of that. And the same goes for shared channels, by the way. So shared channels, which can be opened up externally to your team and also externally to your company. It does need some settings to be applied in your company. Please consider this. I have a lot to say about private and shared channels, and there's no way that I can try and convince anyone in a short time like this. But I do hope that you'll consider it. I'd rather scare you enough for you to think about it twice before you just create private and shared channels. It really causes chaos in the background, and it breaks more things than it actually fixes, unless used well. Like any tool in the world. I think it was SharePoint's uncle that said that with great power comes great responsibility, was it? Same story goes for Teams. If we don't have the right tools and the right knowledge, this will be a very, very dangerous, powerful tool. So please consider that again. We have about 7 minutes left, so I am going to just park it there, because otherwise I will just continue talking. I'm sure ESPC knows this. They have to kick me out of a country every time to get me to stop talking. Okay, so I'm going to just stop there and hand back over to you, Laura, in case there's any questions or any Q&As that we might have.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Tracy, for a wonderful webinar and presentation. So we might get straight into the questions and answers now. So again, should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type it into the questions box now. So the first question I have in here, Tracy, someone wants to know, what about a large organization with different departments who are now working on a file server where there is one folder where they place files and folders now, but they need to go to Teams and SharePoint? Is the best way to create different teams with team sites and add permissions for everyone or per user? What is the best way to work with a big folder now to Teams?
Okay, that's a brilliant question, by the way. I just want to quickly Google something. Yes, I use Google. So let me quickly go to my site. I've got an idea around that. So there's certain instances where things get very messy, especially with cross-functional sharing. So let's say we've got 10 departments, HR, finance, training, etc. And then they used to have a file share where there were all these shared like this. So it's like this crazy, crazy nest of things going on. Something that I've successfully used in companies where I have complexity like that. And also to allow us to kind of get the maturity first, because believe me, if you start using Teams, you actually still don't know what you're doing, okay? You only figure that out in a couple of months' time. So sometimes I start a little bit simpler and then get more complex later. Sometimes I put something in place in the beginning so that I can review it again later. Here is, and I just want to go back, so let's quickly do this. Here's 2 blogs, firstly. So tracyvanderschuyff.com. This specific blog I want to bring your attention to. So build a SharePoint online vault to manage ad hoc files. I definitely don't want to belong to too many teams as well. So many times that folder that is shared isn't really a collaborative thing. People don't sit on calls all the time. They don't sit on meetings all the time. They're sharing documents with each other and then now and then work on a document together. Then you might not need a team. Then I consider things like SharePoint vaults. So I'll build a separate SharePoint site collection, separate. I'll just use it a com site template because I don't need an Office 365 group. And then I build libraries on there where users have the ability to create a folder and then change the permissions on it. And that vault, I actually add on all the teams. Because if you look at the front end of it, and I think this was a video actually, let me just see how it wasn't. It was actually a written blog. If you look at the front end of it and you add that homepage or the vault to every team, the people that look at the tab will only see the folders and libraries they have access to. So this is something that I very, very often put in place to actually help with that serious cross-function sharing. And then the nice thing as follows is, because maybe you change your mind 3 to 6 months later. The nice thing is you've now actually migrated it from your file server, so there was no harm in doing this. Now you've got it on SharePoint online already. If you're well using this over the next 3 to 6 months, if you then figure out that, hey, actually that could be a team, then it's easy peasy to pick that content up and to move it into a team. But this is a very good first step to take to actually open up for that cross-function file sharing, and then to only have structured teams. But again, you have to go and see if this is something that can apply in your environment. Cool. That was a very cool question, by the way.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Tracy, for that. So just another question then, someone wants to know, is it possible to create your own template that users can use when creating a team?
You definitely can, and I'm going to have to go into that. I don't always know everything. So there's ways that you can deploy a template to a company as well for everyone to use. But if you create a team that multiple people have access to, let's say a project team, okay? So let's say there's a project team template, and we always want to have the following 7 channels: initiation, scope, development, design, budget, etc. And it has certain tabs. Then if the people have access to that template, they can use it as a template. So if I look at Teams, I just want to show you this again. If I look at Teams and I go join or create a team, if I create a team, this from a group or team allows me to pick others. So an existing team, I'm going to pick my, I don't know, management team, just an example. And it then copies those channels and the tabs. What you have to know, though, is that the OneNote and the planner must be linked again, and any tabs, the URL must be linked again. But it copies the structure, the channels, and the tabs that are added. So that's a good guideline. You can use an existing team that's built as long as the people have access to it. It's also a very, very good question. Thank you for asking that. Anyone else?
Yeah, just another question here, Tracy. So someone wants to know, do you suggest using third-party governance tools like from AvePoint for creating teams or SharePoint sites?
That's a very difficult question to ask for me. And I know everyone from all those third-party tools, okay? I always say that I'm going to be Switzerland when it comes to Microsoft, and say that I always stick to Microsoft, because if I suggest one person for third-party tools, then I'm going to have others who says I never suggest them, okay? So I'm not going to say it's a bad idea at all. Those platforms are incredibly good and incredibly great at managing and doing the governance on those things, okay? So I don't think there's anything wrong with using them. I do want to ever tell you that there's a lot that you can do internally before you go to third-party tools. With Power Automate and Power Apps, you can put a lot of things in place for requesting a team and for managing the teams, but to a certain level. There is some things that on a certain volume or quantity, you can't manage that well just on the Microsoft side. So depending on the size of your company, I think that would be the driving force behind the decision. But I can promise you smaller companies are very successfully just used on Microsoft, but I put some good protocols in place to actually manage the governance better and put a nice workflow in place. Can be managed internally, but it gets difficult if the company gets bigger. Another good question. Thank you for asking that.
Brilliant. So there's just another question here, and someone wants to know, what is your opinion for using a Teams provisioning tool? Because in an organization, the IT department wants to limit the amount of making unnecessary teams.
I think the question that I just answered actually answers that as well. So when it comes to governance or the provisioning of teams, because you get tools that does this as well. And there's some amazing tools out there. I've been asked to test some of them and to have previews of them. There's some incredible tools out there. Again, I want to tell you that you are able to internally build something that will provision teams. Just want to put it out there with effort. But again, depending on the complexity and the size of the company, there's definitely some great third-party tools that can look at the provisioning. I would definitely suggest provisioning a provisioning system to be in place and rather lock down the creation of teams for everyone in the company. So that's tough. I definitely support that decision, but you can look internally or externally to third-party products. Also a very good question. Thank you for asking that.
Brilliant. And just another question has come in there. So someone wants to know, do you suggest using Teams SharePoint site collection as a SharePoint site?
That's a strange question. So if I create a Microsoft team where I want people to collaborate and communicate, it automatically uses the team site template in SharePoint. It will automatically use that, and it automatically links in Microsoft 365 group to it. Okay, so it links an Azure security group to it. If I go to SharePoint, however, and I don't mind, I know that we're going a minute or two over, Laura, I don't mind at all. So for those of you that needs to jump, I'll have to say bye if you have to. But if I go to SharePoint, by the way, so let's just do this quickly. I like to show you that I have team site and I have communication site. The team site is one that can be linked to a Microsoft team later, by the way, and a communication site is one that we normally use for intranets, etc. I build communication sites when I don't need that security groups. When I'm going to manage the permissions on folder level or on library level, then I don't build a team because I don't need the Office 365 group. So it depends on, long answer for a short question, it depends on what your purpose is. If it's for a group of people that work together, have meetings, share content with each other, build a Microsoft team, which uses this template. So that should answer that question. Also a very good question. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Tracy. So that seems to be all the questions that I have in here.
Wonderful.
So I might just wrap up the Q&A session there. So just on behalf of the ESPC community, we want to extend a huge thank you to you again, Tracy, for taking the time today to carry out this webinar. We really do appreciate it. So that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. That is it for today, folks. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care, and we hope that you'll join us again for some more learning. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.